Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio on what is a very special week, because this is the week before Worlds. I said a week before Worlds. Worlds kicks off in 2 days on Friday, the 21st of August. It is, quite frankly, pretty gosh darn exciting. Next week, I'll be back with my podcast, talking all about the results of Worlds, the decks that did well. Depending on who wins Worlds, I'm even going to try and snag me an interview. Remember last year we had a wonderful interview with the lovely Canadian chap Andrew Estrada, who won Worlds with Rizzy and Genesect. So hopefully we'll be able to do the same thing again this year. And if somebody knows a guy who or girl who wins Worlds this year and could put me in touch after the fact, I would very much appreciate that. Now, I should be starting off with this kind of stuff every week, but I tend to get into it a bit too quickly. Do remember, ladies and gentlemen, that this podcast is available on SoundCloud and on YouTube at youtube.com/PTCG Radio, but is also available on iTunes. So get yourself over to iTunes, subscribe, rate us 5 stars, please, and leave us a little review there as well. And if you want to find a complete catalogue of every episode of PTCG Radio, just go to ptcgradio.wordpress.com or just Google PTCG Radio and click the WordPress one. You'll find it easy enough. It comes up quite quickly. And you'll find a complete list of ones on there. Make sure you check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/PTCG Radio. This week there is a new video on there all about the new Vespiquen deck, which is going down quite well and has started a really good discussion. So loads of detail about that Vespiquen. Go check out that video. I think it is a good one. And of course, check out my video game channel, Wassy Plays. It is a featured channel on PTCG Radio, or just go to YouTube and search Wassy Plays. It's like this, but for video games, so check it out, because I have a sneaky suspicion you just might like it. Now, I want to start off with an email today. I had a lovely email from Michael Basu. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. An email I was going to reply to yesterday, but I thought I literally read it before I went to bed, so I thought, checking it on the podcast, as I'm doing the podcast nice and early this week. He says that he's never attended any live Pokemon events, and he's wondering what Worlds is going to be like. He says that he is going to be able to take his 6-year-old nephew to Worlds, but he doesn't have any information on it. Does he need a ticket? Is there going to be anything to do for people who aren't qualified for Worlds? And what I'm going to say is, yeah, go along. Now, my advice to anyone about any Pokemon event is just go. Now, Worlds is slightly different because it is the only invitation-only event. I suppose the only other one would be if you're going to a national championships in a country for which you're not a resident, then that would be the same kind of thing. But you can't play at Worlds. But there are, and it varies year to year as to exactly what's going on. But essentially, Worlds is going on, and there's usually stuff to do. Now, the one thing you can do is just mill around, and Worlds is fun. Worlds is awesome. It's basically like a big giant celebration of all things Pokemon. So you can wander around and meet people and challenge people to casual games. There is a free play area where people just mill around and play games. There's all kinds of new friends to meet and places to go, and even just literally wandering around the venue, and they spend a lot of money. We're talking over $1 million. I think 3 million was the figure I heard quoted once, but I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it's an awful lot of money setting this up and getting a giant Pikachu falling from the ceiling, and it really is just a spectacular thing to go and check out for an hour or two, just to wander around and enjoy looking at all the cool Pokemon stuff. There's all kinds of spectating to be done, but they also have events like Pokemon League, where you go along and you play some casual games, and then you go and get free stuff. And, I mean, certainly it has unfortunately been a couple of years since I went, but when I went, there was an awful lot of free stuff to be gained. Make sure you take a deck. It doesn't have to be the world's most competitive deck, but make sure you take a deck to join in with League and casual play and challenging random people. But my advice would absolutely be, just wander down on the Friday. You don't have to get there for any particular time. You're not going to be on some kind of massive schedule. Just wander down whenever you can and just soak it up, to be honest. Play some games, meet some strangers, and enjoy the Pokemon goodness. I hope that was a good answer to your email, Michael. Thank you very much for your email. But yeah, just pop yourself down, man. It's going to be awesome. So, what I'm going to do this week is I am going to talk all about some fancy new cards that have been revealed in Japan, and then I'm essentially going to give you the results of my research. Now, generally what I do when there's big tournaments coming up, UK Nationals, US Nationals, Worlds, etc., I sit down and I look at tournament results and I make a big list of decks that I think are going to be good, and then I share that with you. And I did do that this week, but I've also gone a bit further. I've hit up a bunch of really, really good players who are qualified for Worlds, who have been doing a whole bunch of testing, plus one other chap who hasn't, but is very, very knowledgeable. And I'm going to share what they've said along with, and I'm going to basically wrap that up in a nice little package with my opinions as well. Now, I know a lot of you have already travelled to Worlds, but hopefully you can listen to this, on the bus to the venue or whatever on the day. But first, let's start off with some new cards, some very exciting, some not so exciting. So we have a Stage 1 Parasect. Now these are coming in the next Japanese set, which will mean it is our November set. So these are not coming in Ancient Origins, these are in our November set. Now we've got a Parasect. Now it is a Stage 1, but remember it's a Stage 1 grass Pokemon, which means Broken Vine Space is in play, and you can use either Wally or Broken Time Space to evolve on turn 1. And for one colourless energy, i.e. you can use this in any deck, search your deck for 3 different types of basic energy and attach to 3 of your bench Pokemon, 3 of your Pokemon as you choose. Now it's got to be 3 different Pokemon, I believe, yes. Now again, these are Japanese translations, but I use PokeBeach.com because they've generally been quite useful in the past. They've been very good at this. Better than other websites that I don't use because PokeBeach has proven to be better. Now, the way it reads at the moment is 3 different types of basic energy on 3 different Pokemon. Now, not every deck is going to play 3 different types of basic energy, but for instance, this could be a fun little tech in something like a Vespiquen deck. Because you can play any basic energy you like in Vespiquen, so you can play a whole bunch of different basic energy and attach it to 3 different Combees or Vespiquens on the bench. Get over the the problem that Vespiquen is maybe too reliant on DCE. Parasect is a kind of card where you can see that sooner or later it's going to be really useful, but you don't quite know what deck is going to use it. There is a Bronzor, but it's a basic Pokemon. If your opponent only has 1 prize card left, you do 70 for a double colourless energy, pop a Muscle Band on there, and you're doing 90 for a double colourless, and that will one-hit KO any Metal Weak EX. It's not great by any stretch of the imagination, but possibly will become the Bronzor of choice, and let's face it, Bronzong decks, they are seeing a little bit of play at the moment, so I could foresee people actually playing this Bronzor because, well, people are going to play Bronzong anyway, so why not? I mean, it's got 10 more HP than the Phantom Forces Bronzor and a better attack, and that is the only legal Bronzor, so just for the more HP, it's going to be the Bronzor of choice. And it's got an attack which, once every 2 or 3 tournaments you might end up using to win a game. And that's pretty cool. There is a Vivillon, and I really, really like Vivillon. Now, it is a Stage 2 Pokemon, but again, it's a grass Pokemon, so Broken Vine Space can be used here. Now, the attack's garbage. Grass double colourless for 60 and sleep. It's not good enough. But the ability is Energy Colour. You can only use this ability once during your turn. Flip a coin. If head, search your deck for an energy, a basic energy, and attach it to one of your Pokemon. That's really good, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I did do a special podcast a couple of weeks ago where I went through Broken Vine Space in a whole bunch of detail, and I talked about all of the different uses for it. That was week 154, Giant Plant, Forest and Shiftry. And one of the things I said about was that there are an awful lot of Stage 2 grass Pokemon that have really good abilities but have never seen play because they take up a lot of space and are difficult to get out. And one of my personal favourites was Ludicolo, whose ability is basically Pokemon Catcher, but is on a Stage 2 grass Pokemon with an attack you ain't going to want to use. Something like Energy Color here, I really, really like this. I am a big fan of this. And certainly you could take this into almost any deck. I mean, you could play, let's say you're playing something like Vileplume Giratina, you could put a 1-1-1 Pavilion line in, and then, you know, on average, every other turn, you get to search for an energy for your Giratina. Now, unlike what I said in my Top 10 Ancient Origins video on YouTube, you cannot use Mega Turbo for Giratina, but you're not going to use that in a Vileplume deck anyway, because trainers are going to be locked. You've got Double Dragon, you've got DC, you've got Reshiram, and now you've got, potentially, Pavilion. So, again, Pavilion it's not a card that I look at and go, oh my god, everyone's going to play this, it's going to be amazing, but it is the kind of card where I look at and go, sooner or later, someone is going to really take advantage of that card. Now we have we have in fact one new EX with a Mega has been revealed, and I'm a fan. Now Glalie has never been one of my favourite Pokemon, but he's getting an EX, which is quite good because, you know, I quite like the whole getting stage 1 or 2s as EXs rather than just legendaries all the time. So Glalie, and I know that's not what's been happening, you know, with Tyranitar and Ampharos and all that, but I still like it. So Glalie, it's a EX, it's a basic. Ice Breath. Flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. That's kind of cool. Instant Cooling. Water double colorless. 50 damage. If you've got the same number of cards in hand as your opponent, it does 150. And I'm hearing quite strong rumors that Judge is going to be reprinted. Now, Judge came back, I think it was wasn't in Undaunted, I think it was in Triumphant. I'll double check that while I'm talking here. It was in Unleashed, sorry. And it was a trainer card that forced both players to shuffle their hands in and draw 4 cards. So you play a Judge right before you attack, and there was the Omega Prime that had there was a Poker Body back in the day, but the equivalent of an ability. Back in the day, for those that weren't playing, we had Poker Powers and Poker Bodies. Poker Bodies were passive things that were always there, and Poker Powers were specific things you could choose to use. So nowadays, Crawdaunt's discarding would be the equivalent of Poker Power, whereas Vileplume sitting there, no one can play trainers, will be a Poker Body. Anyway, I digress. Yeah, Mega had a good Poker Body, which meant that he attacked for free if you had the same number of cards in hand as your opponent, so people would just play Judge before they attacked. So 150 for a water double colorless, bearing in mind we've got something like Archie's here. I'm quite a fan of Glalie. Now I know we haven't got Blastoise, but we haven't expanded. 150 for free energy is pretty gosh darn good. But even better than that is Mega Glalie. And remember, with Archie's Ace in the hole, that's the supporter card that you can play if it's the only card in your hand, draw 5 cards, and put a water Pokemon on your bench as if it's a basic. So you can use that to get Mega Glalie out on turn 1 of the game. And as this is coming in the set, you will have a Spirit Link, but you won't need to use the whole Spirit Link combo. Cryomouth. Water double colorless. 100 damage. If there are any damage counters on this Pokemon, this attack does 150 more damage. That will KO Mega EXs that are resistant to water without a muscle band. 250 for free energy, ladies and gentlemen, is quite frankly ludicrous. Now, water doesn't have great energy acceleration. Now, in Expanded, it's Blastoise all the way for this bad boy. But you don't need great energy acceleration. It's 2 energy attachments, a water and a double colorless. Oh, did I mention he's a Mega EX? So you can just go double colorless, Mega Turbo, boom, he's there. Mega Glalie has the potential to be the best card in the set, and no, I don't think I'm exaggerating. Now, this is wonderful for me because I've been desperate to use the Ancient Trait Excadrill ever since it came out. Now, I did play that at a League Challenge, and I actually went, not only did I go 3-0 with Excadrill in matches, I actually went 5-0 in individual games. I am entirely undefeated with the ancient trait Excadrill. Now, at this stage, I should point out that I turned up, and I did talk about it on the podcast, that was the week I had to wait in for my sofa to be delivered, so I turned up with a record of 0-2, and as I sat down to play my opponents, they had one win between them, because I was playing people who were having a bad day, whose deck wasn't running, who were hitting bad luck, etc. Not bad players, I played some good players, but players who were having a bad day. So my Excadrill deck didn't get a great workout. But, there are plenty of Pokemon like Excadrill who are Metal type who could take down Glalie. It is, it's counterable, and it's a heck of a combo. But it is absolutely possible on your first turn of the game to go Archie's from Mega Glalie, double colourless energy, Mega Turbo, and then do 100 damage. Now, you're going to have to damage him. Okay. There are ways to do this. If you remember back to last week's pod, 2 weeks ago, I was going through all of the stadiums and all of the trainers and EXs. That was 2 weeks ago on the podcast, so, I don't know, week 156, maybe? I was going through, it was called Ancient Origins Set Review, and it was episode 1, week 156. I told you about a stadium called Faded Town that forces you to put 2 damage counters on every Mega EX between turns, and here we go. Now, the good thing for people who aren't playing Mega Glalie is that Faded Town works between turns. So you have to put Mega Glalie down and Faded Town, let him take the damage, and then he'll take another 20 damage, so he'll actually take 40 damage, and then he'll be ready to go the following turn, by which time he's down to 120 HP. But that's the same as a regular EX, ladies and gentlemen. So, Faded Town is a thing that immediately springs to mind here. But really, that is one heck of a Pokemon. It really is just... The potential there is absolutely astounding. You need to damage yourself, but there's plenty of Pokemon out there that will, do 10 damage to all the Pokemon on the field, and then as soon as they do, you've got 10 damage on all of your Glalies. Add that to Archie's Ace in the Hole, add that to 250 damage for 5 energy, for 3 energy, and hopefully you can see the potential here. Now, the good news is you've got to get the damage, but even when you don't have a damage on him, he still does 100 damage, and your opponent is probably going to attack him. So, even, you can put Faded Town down to 100 damage, or even just sit there doing 100 until your opponent hits you, and then do 250. It's just ludicrous. It really, really is, ladies and gentlemen. So, and I don't have a complete list of all the Pokemon that can damage your own Pokemon. Feel free to tweet me at the Wassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk with some examples of ways in which you could damage Mega Glalie. But the one that springs to mind immediately is Faded Town, or just sit there hitting for 100 until your opponent hits you. I've spent a bit of time talking about Mega Glalie, more than I usually do about new cards, but I'm a big, big fan. And we're almost certain to get a Spirit Link, and even if you don't get a Spirit Link, ladies and gentlemen, you can use Archie's Ace in the Hole anyway. And there are 2 other, and this set, in the same way that Ancient Origins has been really good for grass Pokemon, this set looks absolutely awesome for water Pokemon. We've got Mega Glalie. We've also got Empoleon. Now, the attack does 70 damage for a water colourless, which isn't bad, but it's 2 energy attachments. But the ability, as long as this Pokemon is in play, your basic Pokemon's attacks do 20 more damage. Now, there are a couple contenders for here. I'm going to give you 2 examples. Number 1, Seismitoad. But Seismitoad's weak to grass, and grass is getting a huge boost next set. But you get 4 Empoleon out, and a Muscle Band, and you are doing Quaking Punch for 130. That's quite good. The other thing that this comes to mind with is Miltank. Remember, Miltank does 80 damage for a single colourless energy if you've got a stage 2 on the bench. But if I was playing Miltank right now, I'd want to play it with a grass Pokemon because of Broken Bind Space. I mean, think about it this way, and this is something I should have talked about when I talked about the Broken Bind Space before. When we had Butterfree, which could evolve straight away, all the way up, people played Miltank Butterfree, but 80 damage on its own wasn't enough. Now imagine it's Miltank Vileplume, 80 damage, and your opponent's trainer locked. Or it's Ludicolo, 80 damage, and you get a free Pokemon catcher every turn. Or in Empoleon you would have to use something like a rare candy, but it's 100 damage. You see where I'm going with this? I love Empoleon. He is one of my, he makes my top 6, and it's Pokemon. We've got to have a top 6. He makes my top 6 all-time Pokemon. And I want him to be good. I just don't know what I would play him with at the moment, because the obvious candidates are, you've got your Seismitoad, who, let's be honest with you here, isn't really that great in a grass weak format, although in a grass heavy format because he's grass weak, although he's going to see a bit of play and he's going to be useful. He's very easily countered. And Miltank, I just think there's other stuff. Couple more new cards very, very quickly. There's a Remoraid that sucks, but there is a Vanillux. Now, one of the videos I'm going to be doing in the next week or two on my YouTube channel, I'm going to split it into a little series. I'm going to do the best Pokemon in the trading card game by generation. And I'm going to start with Black and White. X and Y is a bit recent. I'm going to start with Black and White. I'm going to do the best Black and White Pokemon in the trading card game. And I mean cumulative. I'm going to be looking at the Pokemon that always have good cards. Or at least interesting cards. Think Pyroar, think Gengar, think Vanillux. Every Vanillux that's printed seems to be really, really good. And this one's no different. For a water and a colourless, 30 damage. Until the end of your next turn, your opponent cannot play Stadium or Supporter cards. Now imagine you're playing that with Vanillux. No Supporter, no Stadium, no items. Now you are also talking 2 Stage 2s. But holy moly is that fun. And, just in case that attack wasn't good enough, Water double colourless, 70 damage, flip a coin. If heads, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralysed. If tails, they're confused. Don't forget you've got Trick Coin, the tool which allows you to reflip. So you've got a 75% chance of paralysis. But against your average Pokemon that doesn't have free retreat, confusion could be as bad as paralysis. On a coin flip, it's worse. 30 damage and they can't attack. That, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty gosh darn nice. I like that new Vanillux. So, I suppose we had better have ourselves a bit of a chat about Worlds. So we'll start off talking a little bit about the tournament structure, and then we'll talk about some decks, and we'll talk about some players that you should be keeping an eye on, shall we say. So, Worlds is different this year. There is no last chance qualifier. Now, throughout the season, I don't tend to qualify for Worlds, and let me explain why. It might be because I'm a bad player. I don't think it is. I tend to do well occasionally. But if you look at the decks I did well with, you know, I mean, if you look at my best finishes throughout my Pokemon career, if you will, I made top 16 at UK Nationals with Speed Donphan at a time nobody was playing Speed Donphan. I got 33rd at the ECC with Regigigas Mewtwo, which is a deck I never saw anyone else playing. It was essentially like CMT, but with Jirachi instead of Celebi, and Regigigas instead of Tornadus, and nowhere near as good. I just really like Regigigas. I got 5th at the ECC with Flareon, and this was before anyone was playing Flareon, and it was not your kind of traditional Flareon style deck. So, it's not really... I tend to play kind of sillier decks of Pokemon that I really like. I don't tend to play the best decks. And the one year I did go to Worlds, I didn't have an invite. I'd fallen a little bit short. And I actually did decide to play what I thought was the best deck. I played CMT and I went in through the grinder. So the grinder, for those who don't know, was essentially a ridiculous, awesome, brilliant tournament where anyone who didn't have an invite could enter. And it was literally, at least it never used to be, but it ended up being win and you're through, lose and you're out, until there were 8 people remaining. And the last 8 people got an invite to Worlds. So you basically just had to win round after round, one loss and you're out. It was brilliant, and everyone was so nice and polite and lovely. They're not doing that anymore. But they have really lowered the invite. And according to the information on the Pokemon.com website, as of June the 12th, there were 410 people qualified in Masters, not including Japan or Korea. And championship points for Worlds 2014 had not been awarded, and a few nationals had yet to take place. So we're talking in advance of, you're probably talking 430 or more people qualified. Now, what they want to do, they basically want a 3-day tournament. And on the Friday, they are basically replacing the last chance qualifier with day 1. Which essentially is everyone. Now remember, you could win a day 2 invite by being one of the very best people, the top 22 in Europe, for instance. Now, Pokemon want about 128 people in day 2, and they want about 64 to be coming from automatic invitees, and 64 to be coming from the day 1. So that's talking about 128 people that they want from overall. So if we take that off, we can assume there's going to be about 300 people on day 1. About 360 people on day 1. Add the 60 who are already in day 2. And they want 64 people to go through, i.e., you are going to have, and this is a very rough calculation, let me be clear on that, but you're going to have a roughly, all players being even, which we know is not the case, you will have a roughly 1 in 6 chance of getting to day 2 if you don't have a day 2 invite. So players with a day 1 invite will have a roughly 1 in 6 chance, 1 in 6 players, although in reality, with my rounding, it's going to be slightly less than that. Now, judging by the number of players, we don't know how many players there are going to be, but you're looking at a top 64, and the way Pokemon wants to do it is, depending how many rounds there are, you need to go X2, i.e. you can lose 2 games. So if there's 4 rounds, you need 6 points, 2 wins, 2 losses. If there's 5 rounds, you need 9 points, 3 wins, 2 losses. If there are 6 rounds, you need 12 points, 4 wins, 2 losses. Or you can draw 2 games. So, for instance, so if it's, let me start again. With 4 rounds, you need 6 points. So a win and 3 draws will do it. For 5 rounds, you need 9 points. So 2 wins and 3 draws will do it. For 6 rounds, you need 12 points. So 3 wins and 3 draws will do it. You can afford to draw 3 rounds or lose 2 rounds. But as soon as you have a loss and a draw, that's basically it. That is it. That's pretty harsh. Now, in that, draws are brutal. Because if you draw a game, you can afford 2 more draws, but you cannot lose. Now, this is going to create a very interesting dynamic. Because people who have already drawn a game are going to be desperate not to lose, to the point where they will be maybe trying to stall and get draws. People who haven't lost a game are going to be desperate not to draw. So people are going to be flipping for wins. And it's going to happen. Just let me be very clear about this. Now, there's going to be a lot of judges. They're going to be watching you like a hawk. And let me clarify Pokemon's position on this. If you randomly determine the outcome of a game, you both get disqualified from the tournament. It's not a double game loss, it's a disqualification from the tournament. So I am heartily recommending you don't do this. But anyone who has already lost a game is basically done. They need to just keep winning. If you've already lost, a draw puts you out. Because let's say there's 5 rounds, you get a loss and a draw, you've got 1 point. A loss and a draw will be okay. But essentially that draw counts as your second loss. So you can get a loss and a draw, but you can't get a loss and 2 draws. So you can have 2 losses or 3 draws and you're okay. And again, you can have a loss and a draw because it's the equivalent of 2 losses. So if you've got somebody who's already lost a game, it doesn't really matter whether they draw or lose. But if you've got somebody who's already drawn a game, they can't really lose because then they need to win out. So, but they can draw that and then they can draw one more. People are really going to want to avoid draws. And in a lot of circumstances, losing is flipping for the win is going to be better. And there are going to be a whole bunch of people that randomly determine that. It is a bit brutal. So let me, just in case I was a little confusing, let me go through that one more time. You can afford 2 losses or 3 draws. And as long as that's all you've got, you're going to make it into day 2. If you already have 1 loss, a draw essentially counts as a loss. And then if you have a loss and 2 draws, you're done. Because 5 rounds, loss and 2 draws means you've got 1 point, 2 games left. You cannot get more than 7 points. Now, I don't know how many rounds there are going to be. People I've spoken to have estimated that there's going to be something like 6 or 7 rounds, which means you're going to need to go 4 or 5-2. I am going to try and be tweeting all weekend about Worlds, but I have got family commitments over the weekend, so I will give you a full rundown next week, but I'll try and keep you updated on Twitter at the Wassy as much as I know. I'm also going to try and be getting info from the UK players as we're going. Because even if I'm not watching the live stream, I can still be checking the results online and seeing which UK players are doing well or not. So that's how the tournament is going to work in terms of day 1. Then we get on to day 2, and really, and I'm sorry if anyone's offended by this, day 1 is kind of like the LCQ now, but everybody gets the goodie bag. It's day 2 and 3 which are the good ones. So on Saturday, you're going to get the second phase, which is Swiss rounds, and it's going to be a whole new tournament. You do not carry on your records, so it doesn't matter if you just scraped through or you went undefeated. Everyone's equal at the start of Saturday, and you do have the option to change your deck. And I told you I polled a whole bunch of world players for this episode, and I had a bunch of people saying, well, this deck could be quite good for day 1, because it's quite a steady kind of deck that probably won't lose more than 2 games. But this deck is better for day 2 because it's really an all or nothing, and that's really what day 2 is. And then it's going to cut to top 8. So again, you're looking at about 128 players, top 8, which means you're looking probably around 8 rounds and a minimum 6-1-1 for cut. And I don't know if 6-1-1 is going to be safe. Kind of like we had at the UK Nationals, but a bit worse. So it's probably, from what I understand, Saturday is likely to be 8 rounds, and you're going to need 6-1-1. So again, draws are not going to be good. And from my experience of playing at Worlds, people take Worlds seriously. In my very first game at Worlds, back in 2012, I was playing a guy, I shan't name the guy, I was playing a guy, and I've heard, and when I told a few people at the tournament, and a couple people went, yeah, he's from my state, he's got that bit of a reputation. But essentially, now the first time I was in the wrong, a friend of mine walked past the game like 2 minutes in, and I went, oh, what happened? He said I donked Dustin Zimmerman, and my opponent called a judge and tried to get me disqualified for talking to a friend. Clearly, now I shouldn't have been talking to a friend. It was a little bit rude. I'll concede that. But it was a World, and I grinded in, and I was excited and happy, and he kind of ruined it. And then later in the game, there was a Pichu that had an attack playground. Both players searched their deck for as many bench Pokemon, many Pokemon as they like, basic, and put them on their bench. Then Pichu is asleep. He basically baited me into not searching for Pokemon by immediately putting his Pichu asleep and then telling me it was my go. And then, to be fair, again, this was my fault, because I should have been paying more attention, but it was done in such a way as to try and kind of, like I say, bait me into not searching for bench Pokemon. And then I started searching for Pokemon after he'd put Pichu asleep, and he called a judge and said, oh, that's 2 warnings now, he needs to get disqualified. The judge pointed out that they were 2 very, very minor warnings, and it's in no way a disqualification. But it completely ruined the tournament for me, playing somebody who was so into it. It really was just, if you're playing at Worlds, ladies and gentlemen, please try and enjoy yourself. You're working all year for this. Yeah, there's some hella good prizes, but remember, if you make day 2, and there's about a 1 in 6 chance of making day 2, you've then got to go 6-1-1 or better to make it into the top 8. it's not worth having a bad weekend. Also, might I remind you, unless you live in Boston, you probably spent one heck of a lot of money getting a Worlds this year. If you're only going to try and do well, I do question sometimes. And then there's going to be the finale on Sunday, but it's going to be a standard top 8. Every part of this is going to be done in a standard format. There's no expanded format at all. And the prizes are hella good. You know, top 32 gets $1,500. Top 16 gets $2,500. Top 8 gets $5,000. Third and fourth gets $7,500. Second gets $15,000, and first gets $25,000. I like the fact that first place is going to be playing for essentially $10,000. Although top 4 is going to be playing for $7,500, but the big one is top 8. Because first to fourth get a trophy and 2 boxes. That's not terribly exciting, actually. They get factory sealed sets of the 4 most recent expansions. But here's the big thing. They get a paid invite next year. Probably a day 1 invite. But top 4 get a paid invite. That is the biggie, ladies and gentlemen. 5th to 32nd get 2 boxes and some championship points as well as scholarship. I don't know about you, but coming 32nd and getting $1,500 scholarship, 2 boxes of cards and some championship points to start off next year, you know, that's pretty gosh darn nice. So a couple of players I think you should look out for. I'm going to give you... Now, I don't know too much about which Japanese players have qualified, but it's your standard kind of players. Yaneda and Yamato, you know, people like that. But I'm going to tell you a couple UK players to look at, and then I'm going to tell you the best players in the world that I think this year that you really, really, really need to look out for. So let us start off with some UK players, people with whom I'm very familiar. There's 2 people I think you really need to look out for. And just so we're clear, ladies and gentlemen, I love all the UK players, even down to Jake Wolvin himself. And I will be cheering on all the UK players and anyone that listens to my podcast. If you're playing Worlds and you listen to my podcast, send us a tweet, send me an email, let me know how you did, or keep me updated throughout the day. I would very, very much like to hear from all you guys about how you're doing. But 2 UK players that I think you really, really need to look out for are firstly Alex Dow. Alex came 10th in Europe this year, getting a paid invite and a top 22. He's already made it through to day 2. And he's got himself... He won UK Nationals. Now, officially, Ollie Fenley won UK Nationals. He will be listed as the UK champion, but Ollie and Alex are best friends, and by making the final, guaranteed himself a paid invite. So, what basically happened was that Alex scooped to Ollie, because if he scoops, then... They both get a paid invite. If he wins, he gets a paid invite, and Ollie doesn't qualify for Worlds. So, you know, it does kind of make sense. He is a fantastic player, and, you know, just this year, like I say, he got himself to 10th in Europe. He won UK Nationals. So... you really, really need to keep an eye out for this boy. He's on it, quite frankly. So, something to bear in mind, shall we say. So, the other guy I think you need to look out for is Ryan Morehouse. Now, I believe he did very, very well at Pokémon Worlds last year. He did incredibly well at Masters. Unfortunately, didn't make Top Cut. But oh my goodness, he was pretty gosh darn close. And he's got a top 22 paid invite this year. He's already made it into day 2. And he just has a habit of winning stuff. So Ryan Morehouse and Alex Dow are people that I think you most need to look out for this year. Because they really, really are. You know, they're the 2 who are most likely to do well. Now, there are other players like, for instance, Charlie Powell and Tamal Cameron, made top 32 at Worlds a couple of years ago with Kling Klang, and are not to be overlooked. And, you know, people like Jake Wolvin also made top 32 a couple of years ago. So people to look out for. Now, in terms of international players, really, Chase Maloney and Jason Klaczynski have just been winning everything this year. It's just crazy. And if you go and look at championship points, they're just, cleaning up, ladies and gentlemen. They really are just absolutely cleaning up. So, keep an eye out for those people. Chase Maloney is the top of championship points with 1,232. Jason second with 1,077. And then there's people like Dylan Bryan, who's also over 1,000. Christy Britton, who's on 922. Andrew Estrada, who's on 825. And, like I say, won World last year. Frank Diaz tends to do well. He's on 722. There's all kinds of good people. And I suppose if we have a look at some Europeans to look out for, certainly in terms of how well they've been doing, the championship points thing is not going terribly well, unfortunately. It's not showing me all of the rankings, which is a little bit annoying. Hey-ho, we shall get over it. But they really are. There's a huge amount of people. Here we go. Sorry, I found it. Martin Janus, who's got 1,320. Him from the Czech Republic. Simon Eriksson from Denmark's on 1,255. Nicholas Lenhart Rappel from Germany, who's been winning everything and has 1,195. And other people who are over 1,000, and there are a few in Europe. We've got Tommy Latala from Norway, Patrick Landis from Switzerland, Mies Breckenmeyer from the Netherlands, Tord Reklev from Norway, Paulo Silva from Portugal, Igor Costa from Portugal, who has won Worlds in the past. Like I say, Alex Dow from the UK is on 1029. We've got Patrick Rati from Finland. I'm sorry for mispronouncing that, sir. Lucas Peer from Austria and Stefan Eriksson from the Netherlands. So all people that you really, really should be looking out for in terms of really, really sound players. So there we go. There's some players that I've named, people that you should be looking out for who are likely to do very, very well. So I've told you about the format, I've told you about some players to look out for. Let's finish up by looking at some decks. Now, from everyone I've looked at, I have found half a dozen consensus decks that we need to be thinking of. Let me make this very, very clear. These are not the only decks to think about. I am not guaranteeing one of these is going to win Worlds. I am saying that from what I've thought and what I've found out from people I've spoken to, these are the half a dozen decks that are in people's minds a cut above the rest. So in no particular order, Night March. Now, Night March revolves around Joltik and Pumpkaboo, who can use Night March for a double colourless energy. Remember that Pumpkaboo's got to have Dimension Valley in play for that to work. And you've got Mew EX, who can copy Pumpkaboo's Night March for a DCE if there's a Dimension Valley in play, or Joltik's for a DCE if there isn't Dimension Valley, and just one basic energy if there is. And you do 20 times the amount of Pokemon that have Night March in the discard pile. So you basically hammer a whole bunch of Night March Pokemon into the discard pile. And, with the format we've got at the moment, with the speed of the decks, with things like Shaman and Battle Compressor, you can get easily, 10 Night Marches in the discard if you need to in a turn or two. You can be one-hit KOing EXs. Now, if you bring in Muscle Band here that does 20 extra damage, you're essentially looking at 8 Night Marches to KO your average EX, and 10 to KO your average Mega with a Muscle Band. It's fast, and it hits for type weakness against things like Rayquaza. Now, it hits weakness for Rayquaza, and some decks, like Metal and Manectric, tend to take, or Groudon, tend to take a turn or two to get going, and that's where Night March basically gets going so fast, it just runs through them. And that's really the power of Manectric. Now, it's got some downsides. Anyone playing Landorus has quite a nice Night March matchup, although they'd want to be playing something like Silent Lab to turn off the ability of Mr. Mime, who's going to be blocking the bench. And certainly Seismitoad And now Lysandra's trump card has gone out. It used to be that if Seismitoad just went Lysandra's trump card Quaking Punch, they won the game. But even so, a Seismitoad who Quaking Punches early enough, turning off the battle compressor, etc. really is going to hurt them. And something like Silent Lab or Wobbuffet is also going to be very, very good against Night March, because they rely on drawing a huge amount of cards with Shaman. And indeed, you can turn off the ability of Mew. Although, let me be clear, Wobbuffet won't turn off Mew, because Mew is psychic. But certainly something like a Groudon or a Silent Lab will turn off Mew, forcing your opponent to attack with the Night Marchers. And although Mew with a Dimension Valley can attack for 1 basic energy, both Joltik and Pumpkaboo can only attack for a DCE. Now, it's also got some weirdly bad matchups. Donphan has got a crazy good Night March matchup. But it's a good all-rounder. The only really bad matchup it has, that's all. The only really bad, there are some niche decks like Donphan, but in terms of decks that are likely to see a significant amount of play, it's only really Toad that you're really worried about. Groudon, you're going to be able to, get Night Marching probably quite far before they get their Groudon set up. Metal, again, usually takes a turn or two to get going. Rayquaza, yes, they play Altaria, but most people play a 1-1 list, part might be prize, and you can KO it. Then you're hitting for weakness. Manectric takes really till turn 2 or 3 to really get going. Although if Manectric plays Garbodor and gets a quick Garbodor, and remember now with Wally you can have a turn 1 Garbodor, then that could swing the matchup. But something like, Toad, especially if they play Garbodor, really could cause Night March problems. One deck which has come up, and from the people I spoke to, this is the consensus pick for deck people are going to really be playing, is Manectric. Now, the awkward thing about Manectric is, how do you play it? Now, the basic's really good. 20 to the active and 20 to 1 of the bench for 1 energy. 60 to the active or 120 if they've got a tool for 2 energy. And yeah, your opponent can not play a tool to limit you to 60 damage, but then they're not playing a tool that they want to be playing. Like I've been talking about in recent podcasts with, Pokemon not benching stuff to limit your damage output. Well, okay, but you're still not benching stuff you'd like to be benching. And then you've got the Mega that does 110 for 2 energy and attaches 2 energy to the bench. And then you've got Rough Sea, so if you're not one-hitting... Oh, and he's got free retreat. And this is why Manectric is so gosh darned good. You do 110 damage, you attach energy to a Manectric on the bench, or whatever. And then you heal with Rough Seas. And if you're about to die, you retreat for free into another Manectric, and you heal with Rough Seas. See where I'm going with this? It's really quite good. Now, anything that can one-hit KO Manectric is a problem. That's why Night March, if it gets going fast, can have a good Manectric matchup. But it's not that difficult to put one Seismitoad into Manectric, or Garbodor into Manectric. And then the tide starts turning a little bit. The other thing Manectric can play is the Delta Plus Articuno. Now, I said that Articuno, remember, it's the one that's got an ancient trait which allows it to take an extra prize, and it's an ancient trait, and ancient traits, we have no mechanic through which they can be turned off at the moment. And what that basically means is that, the thing I said about Articuno is that it takes a bit of energy. Well, the brilliant news is now you can use Manectric to put the energy on, and then you're fine, which is awesome. So, yeah, that's pretty gosh darn good. You can actually win the game with 2 KOs with strategic use of Articuno. And, of course, Articuno is water, so can heal with Rough Seas. Now, the problem with Manectric is it's not great against Groudon. No, you can put in some grass attackers to try and cover it, but really, Groudon's going to be one-hitting you, and you're going to be two-hitting them at best. It is a little bit rough. You are going to have a speed advantage, I'll give you that. But remember that when the Groudon gets going, you can't touch him. Well, you can't Lysandre him up. Obviously, you can still use the first attack to do 20 damage to the bench, but they'll probably be playing a Mr. Mime. And it can fall to Night March. But it's got type advantage on Ray, and it's, especially if you've got Garbodor out, to turn off the Altaria. And it's really good against Metal. It's faster, it's got resistance, etc. And it's really, really quite good against Toad, because Toad does 30 damage, you heal 30 damage. Okay, they put a Muscle Banner doing 20 damage per turn, and you've got free retreat. And you don't really need trainers, because you can just attach energy through the attack. It's really good against Toad, it's really good against Metal, it's pretty gosh darn good against Ray, but it does struggle with Groudon and Night March. And that's what we're going to see with all of these decks. Now, you should have guessed the top 6 decks by now, because I'm kind of having to refer to them as we go. There is no deck for Worlds this year that we can go, boom, best deck. Like last year, we could say Virizion Genesect, best deck. The year before, I think, maybe 1 year before that, we could sit here and say, with certainty, Darkrai is the best deck. We can't say that this year, and that's kind of fun. Speaking of Ray, let's talk about Ray. It's really, 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 really fast and really, 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 really consistent. You've got Winona, which allows you to search for everything you need. Altaria with Delta Revolution, so you can evolve in 1 turn to get rid of weakness. You've got Spirit Link and Delta Revolution to get going in 1 turn. You've got double Colourless Energy and Mega Turbo, so you can get all the energy in 1 turn. You've got Skyfield to fill your bench, and you can be one-hit KOing anything on the first turn. It's got a whole heap of problems, but if you want a fast, consistent deck that can go off and beat anything, Ray's your choice. Now, it can struggle with Night March if they get rid of your Altaria, but it's really not that bad if they don't. There's a really good game on my YouTube channel between, it's not that far back, it's between Luke Kirkham and Ryan Morehouse with Ray and Night March, and, go and have a look. It's not that bad for Ray. It can struggle with Manectric because of the weakness, especially if they're playing something like Garbodor, but it's probably going to beat Metal, and if it gets going, it's going to beat Toad now that Lysandra's trump card is banned and they can't just reuse hammers. And you'd almost have to try to lose to Groudon, given that essentially you're trading one-hit KOs and you're getting set up one heck of a lot faster than they are. Metal decks, they did very well at Nationals, so they're going to see a whole heap of play. And remember, you've got the non-EX Heatran, which is a very, very efficient attacker now. And remember that you've got, Enning doesn't really matter, like, at all, because once you're set up, you're set up. And you've got Dialga, who can one-hit KO, and you've got Aegislash. And except for Manectric, every deck I've just told you about, Ray, Night March, Toad, Groudon, they all rely on special energy, and Aegislash stops them attacking. It's a bit of a control deck, it's not quite as fast as some of the others, and like I say, Night March has a speed advantage, but if you get an Aegislash out, then your opponent basically has to attack with Mewtwo for 1 energy. Mew. Well, Aegislash has a resistance to Mew, and Mew has 120 HP and can be one-hit KO'd by a non-EX Heatran. And then you can KO the Heatran back for 1 prize. See where I'm going with this? I am simplifying the matchups a little bit. There are other ways it can go. Metal, I don't love the matchups of Metal, I'm going to be honest. I would pick Manectric over Metal. Night March could well beat Metal. Now, a lot of Night March decks remember playing Polion and Water Energy, so that's a nice efficient attacker that doesn't use special energy against the Aegislash. Now, Metal can be quite good against Toad, but if Toad gets set up, especially with a Garbodor, Metal's got nothing. Groudon goes either way. If they just focus on basic energy, they can take it down. But it's quite easy for the Groudon player to, not be able to find enough energy when they're not able to use strong energy. Last couple quickly, I've talked about most of these, so I can be a bit quicker. Toad, he's lost a lot of power since Trump Card got banned, but he won't go away. You can play it with Bats, you can play it with Garbodor, you can play it even with Manectric and Garbodor to really cover your matchups. You're good against Night March if you Quaking Punch early enough. You're not good against Manectric. Rayquaza, if you get set up early enough and get a few hammers, you will win that game. Metal, you'll probably win if you play Groudon, play hammers, and Groudon, you basically have no chance unless they just draw absolutely nothing. So, that leaves us with Groudon. Now, Groudon is the one I like least of all of these. But there's going to be good players that make it into day 2 or maybe into top 8 with Groudon. Because if you look at the matchups, okay, it's got a good Manectric matchup. I'll give it that. And it's got a good Toad matchup. But Ray's probably going to outspeed it. Night March is probably going to outspeed it. Metal could go either way. So it's got some very good matchups, Toad and Manectric, but Night March and Ray are going to see some play, and they are very bad matchups. So they're the top 6 decks. Now, if I had to give you if I was giving my advice to someone going to Worlds, bearing in mind I've been playing the Worlds format, but I've not been obsessively testing for Worlds like I did the year I decided CMT was. I can't use that word, it's a nice podcast. Since I decided it was all that and a bag of potato chips, I would say Ray or Manectric. Ray is a case of, I'm going to win or I'm going to not, but it's going to be darned consistent. I'm not going to get many draws with Ray. Or I'd go Manectric with Garbodor. Bats is good, but I'd go Garbodor. And I would probably stick an Articuno in there for good measure. And the reason basically is, well, with Garbodor, I've now got a really good chance against Metal and against Night March. Hopefully, I can beat Groudon with speed, or I can just not use Manectric. I can try and use some non-EX attackers, like something like Articuno, so I only have to KO 2 Groudon. And I've got, like I say, with Garbodor, I've got a better Night March matchup. Ray and Metal become really good. Toad was already really good. And Groudon will be the only one I'd be terrified of seeing, although I wouldn't like seeing Night March. But as I've said, all of these have got 2 pretty bad matchups. If you're playing Night March, you really don't want to sit down opposite Toad. Actually, I suppose Night March might have the best matchups of all of them, if I'm honest. Or anything playing Garbodor. Manectric, you really don't want to come across a Groudon or a Ray that goes off really, really fast. Ray, you don't want to come across a Manectric that goes off really fast, or a Night March, or maybe even something like a Toad if they get going. Metal really doesn't want to see Manectric or probably Groudon or maybe even Night March. Toad doesn't want to see Groudon or Manectric. And Groudon really doesn't want to see Ray or Night March. You see where I'm going with this? There is no great option. Couple more I want to mention. These are a couple others that came up in my discussions with these World players. And we're going a bit long today, but it's a World preview, and hopefully you've all got a bit of travelling to do to listen to this. I'm doing it literally the first thing I do when I get up on Wednesday, rather than later in the afternoon, evening as I usually would. Wailord. Now, I did a video all about Wailord on my YouTube channel that I heartily recommend you guys go and check out if you haven't already. It's called What's the Deal with Wailord? Just go onto my channel and search Wailord. You'll find it very easily. I don't like Wailord for Worlds, but this is kind of what happens sometimes. We end up in this position where there's a deck that looks really good, so everybody starts teching against it, and then everyone goes, well, there's no point playing it now. Everyone's teching against it. And then it comes out and just smashes. Wailord is very easily countered. But like I said, when I talk into Wailord, I've talked about Wailord a lot on the podcast after US Nationals and on my Wailord video. Wailord is the kind of deck where if you sit down and you've got a Wailord counter and you know how to play the matchup, you ain't gonna lose. But if you sit down and you haven't tested it and you don't know how to play it, or you just don't have a Wailord counter, what are you gonna do? You sit down with a Rayquaza deck and you think, Wailord, fine, I can KO 3 Wailords. Or, okay. So your opponent just puts down 3 Suicunes. Now, as a Rayquaza player, have you made your deck so you can knock out 3 Suicunes? I mean, what non-EXs are you playing in Rayquaza? Altaria? You are never going to keep enough energy on an Altaria with all of the I'm bringing your Rayquaza active, I'm discarding your energy shenanigans of Wailord in order to do it. Groudon? Now everyone says, I can win with Groudon because, you know, I can get a Primal Groudon up, blah blah blah. Well, maybe you can. Well, what about Suicune? You're going to knock out Suicune? Okay, maybe you're playing some Silent Labs. How many Silent Labs are you playing? Because Groudon's playing 4 Rough Seas. So are you really going to be able... And yeah, don't get me wrong, if you Primal Evolve, then Wailord can't get rid of your energy or bring you active. But are you really going to be able to get that going and stop your opponent Lysandre? You know, because as soon as you get a Groudon up, your opponent's going to Lysandre something off the bench. And if you just have Primal Groudon, they're going to have Suicune. Are you prepared for this? Now, 9 March seems to have a good Wailord matchup. But are you one-hitting Wailords? Because if you're not, you're losing a DCE per attack. And they're healing the damage off. And this is kind of what I'm saying with Wailord. I don't think Wailord's a good bet. Now, just so we're clear, if you put 1 Bunnelby in your deck, you cannot lose to Wailord. Because as you're about to lose, you just Bunnelby some cards back. I mean, you can start discarding their deck if you want, but if you use Bunnelby's other attack to recover cards, you can't deck out. Now, if you play it badly, your opponent can Lysandre something else up, so you get it stuck in the active and deck out. But if you play it properly, 1 Bunnelby guarantees you can't lose to Wailord. But how many of you playing Worlds have put a Bunnelby in your deck? I think Wailord is primed to do well, purely because... Now, it is not a deck I'm recommending playing. When I say primed to do well, I think 1 or 2 people, and only 1 or 2 people, will do well with Wailord. Because everybody came out and said, I can beat Wailord easy, just put 1 Bunnelby in your deck, or just play the game exactly like this. And I saw a whole lot of posts on Facebook of people going, yeah, but if they bring out Suicune, and I'm playing Groudon, I'll just play a Silent Lab, sorted. And everyone was basically assuming they're going to have perfect draws and not have any bad prizes. I'm going to be very interested to see how well Wailord does. That, to me, is one of the most interesting thing about Worlds 2015. How well is Wailord going to do? The other deck that came up, and this is one that took me a little by surprise, is Primal Kyogre. Now, Andrea Ciolin, a lovely Italian chap who spent quite a bit of time in the UK, so I got to spend time with him in a whole bunch of tournaments. Lovely, lovely chap, huge Pokemon knowledge, but also lovely, lovely chap. I don't think that should be understated. I chatted to him about this, and he said he would love the final to be Primal Kyogre against Primal Groudon, and I'm on his side. That would be amazing. I don't think that's going to be the final, but something like Kyogre, well, there's the decks that I talked about, the only one of those that isn't almost entirely EX based is Night March and in some builds Metal. And you're doing, 30 damage, 2 each, as well as damage to the active. Now, it's a little bit slower getting going, is Kyogre, but you get to attach 2 energy per turn. That's quite useful. And need I remind you, Rough Seas. Healing 30 damage every single turn. That's pretty gosh darn good, ladies and gentlemen. That's really quite good. You're healing 30 damage every single turn. Now, I don't know about you, but if I've got a big EX with a whole bunch of HP, and I'm healing 30 damage per turn, I'm pretty excited about my chances if I'm also doing a huge amount of damage. So, yeah, quite frankly, I'm pretty excited. So we're going to finish off today. I'm going to give some thanks to the people that helped me out, and I'm going to give you a few choice quotes, shall we say. So, and I'm sorry if I forget anyone here. It is not deliberate. So thank you to Mal Cameron, UK player. He's going out to Worlds. Like I say, he's made top 32 in the past. Now, obviously, I'm not going to give away any of the conversation where I asked what they were playing, but he was the one that really kind of pushed to me about the fact that people are going to flip for wins, and the fact that judges are really going to be on top of that. And he was one of the first people that, really pushed the whole Manectric thing to me. Now, when I asked him what he thought was going to be good, he said that, personally, I think it's going to be heavily Manectric focused. Other than that, Metal Toad and Groudon and Night March will be good, because Manectric beats both Toad and Metal, which were the two decks that came out best from Nationals. Or at least, you can build Manectric variants to beat literally any matchup at the moment. And he's correct, and there's two things there which are really kind of interesting from what Tamal said. Firstly, the versatility of Manectric. Secondly, there is a recency bias in Pokemon. People play what did well recently. So, with Metal and Toad being the best decks at the bigger Nationals, especially in the US and Canada, that's what people are going to be playing, and they are Manectric's two best matchups. Alex Hill, friend of the podcast, fantastic Pokemon player from Michigan, and I believe Lions fan, so all good in my book. One of the people for whom I'll be cheering rather loudly at the weekend, although it might be embarrassing at the barbecue I'm going to. And he said, a lot of American players have been hyping up Mega Manectric since after our Nationals. The new version with Tool Drop Trubbish and a bunch of tools has been getting some talk recently as well. I said play it with Garbodor. And when you play with Garbodor, you can play it with Tool Drop Trubbish, efficient non-EX attacker. And he was the one that really put me thinking about Wailord. Surprisingly, I think Wailord is poised to do pretty well. I don't think a lot of people are going to tech against it, and only a small number of decks are inherently able to beat it. Toad will also be pretty good at Worlds. It has a lot of strong matchups, and just because it shuts down so many decks. I had a good chat to my friend Luke Burke. There's no quotes I particularly want to point out, but Luke was incredibly helpful. I chatted to him for quite a while about that. Ryan Morehouse, chap I've talked about. Now, he said very interestingly, this year's meta is much harder to guess due to the amount of viable decks compared to last year. So the top 8 will probably be diverse like US Nationals, which I thought was very, very interesting. Now, Ryan is one of the people whose opinions I respect the most when it comes to Pokemon. He is just so Pokemon savvy. He said that for day 1, the consistent decks like Manectric, Garbodor and Toad Bats, probably including Manectric, will take up most of the spots as they can go X2, taking the 2 bad matchups. And remember I said you need to go X2 to get into day 2. He said something like Groudon could take up some places, while I feel that Rayquaza might make 3 or 4 of the day 2 spots, but it's a weaker choice for day 1 due to high counters. Now, this is what I like about Ryan's thought process here. He's splitting his thought into day 1 and day 2. Although I suppose he can afford to, because he doesn't have to worry about day 1. Day 2-wise, I feel like some of the anti-decks, like Kyogre, there we go, and maybe even Virgin, could take up a spot or 2 in the top 8. Night March and Raichu builds could also take advantage of the meta from day 1. I don't think Toad Garb will do very well compared to other Toad builds. Now, I haven't mentioned Raichu decks, and it's very simply because I don't have a lot of faith. And that's not in a mean way. I just think that it's very difficult to make them good and able to beat everything. I mean, to take an example, I'm going to go... I'm mentioning it loads over my podcast and videos recently, but I've been thinking a lot about the Flareon deck I played at the ECC. It was a counter deck. But at the time, you had Plasma, Blastoise, Darkrai, Virgin. They were the only 4 decks that were really, really good. Flareon beats Virgin, Leafeon and Zoroark beat Blastoise, Drifblim beats Plasma, and to be honest, stuff like Leafeon and Zoroark could pick up the slack against Darkrai, but you could put in something like even something like a Sork or a Stunfisk to pick up the slack. The whole point was there were 4 decks and there were easy counters. But there aren't really ones like that. I mean, you could play Flareon to beat your Metal deck and Raichu to beat Ray, but the problem is, nowadays, Raichu wants to have a full bench with Skyfield, Flareon wants everything in the discard pile. even if you do that, are you going to be able to take down Groudon? What are you going to do against Seismitoad? Are you going to be able to take down Manectric? You ain't hitting for weakness. You ain't one-hitting and they're healing everything. So as much as I like Raichu, and I really, really do, honestly, I don't think it's particularly good. Thanks as well to Benjamin Pham, Nicholas Anthony Pierce, and Alex Dow. All of whom are qualified for Worlds. Alex and Benjamin actually have a day 2 invite. No quotes I really want to point out here, but I want to finish with some quotes from Andrea Ciolin. Again, a really, really good player. And I want to pick out some quotes from what he said, because again, he gave me a really, really good response. He said, it's going to be strongly based on the results of US Nats, so you're going to see tons of Seismitoad, Manectric, and Bronzong-based decks. I.e., he's saying a lot of what everyone else was saying. People are really expecting Toad, Metal, and Manectric. He said Rayquaza Bronzong's going to be less popular than what we see suggested in certain websites, because it suffers most from the decks that performed well at US Nats. It's difficult to beat Garbodor-based decks and the anti-EX decks, like Klinklang. Another deck I haven't mentioned, which could see tangential success, is the Plasmon that blocks EXs. Its weakness to Lightning makes it vulnerable to Night March, Raichu, and any deck that can splash in a Manectric EX. Too much for a top choice, and he's absolutely correct. He said he's got reasons to believe that Seismitoad Garbodor is going to be lower presence than expectations, because traditionally the deck that wins US Nationals gets a lot of hate, and most players choose to play against it rather than play it. But he does concede that Seismitoad Garbodor is straightforward, doesn't have any auto losses, and is extremely consistent, so could see less of a drop-off as a play than most. Although he does call the deck boring. He is correct. He said that if we exclude the top decks, which were highly influenced by a surprise factor, like Wailord, Hippowdon, and Klinklang, this leaves Manectric Garbodor as the best of the Tier 1 decks. Let me be very, very clear about this, ladies and gentlemen. It is not a coincidence that so many of these top players that I've polled have come across Manectric EX. Now, I did have some more private conversations with them where I asked them what they were playing and stuff like that. Obviously, I'm not sharing any of that with you. That would be very improper. I'm sharing with you their general thoughts on what, they said was likely to see a bit of play here and there. And really, Manectric EX did come across as a deck that everyone thought was going to be good. Now, this is turning into one of our longer podcasts. Although no one's ever complained about that before. In fact, they tend to complain about my pointing it out rather than it going long. But we are going to stop after just one last little thing from Andrea here, because I love what he finished off by telling me. He said that the format was kind of open for a couple of others. Primal Kyogre and Keldeo. Now, this is the Keldeo that was played with Archie's Ace in the Hole, and it got, I think, 9th at US Nationals. You play Archie's Ace in the Hole to get Blastoise out, build up Keldeo, and away we go. Now, that particular chap, and his deck list has been published on certain websites, he said he was getting, 80% turn 1 Blastoise, and then half the time he was getting Sacred Sword for 170 on turn 1. So, when kind of 4 in 10 games, or around 1 in 3, you're hitting 170 turn 1, it's pretty gosh darn good. Although very, very susceptible to Leafeon if anyone's playing these counter decks. And he talked about Primal Kyogre. He said both of them have a really strong Manectric matchup, which is true because they can use Rough Seas and they hit harder. And they have few auto losses through the field. Keldeo is so fast that it can hope to win a bunch of games just by outspeeding the opponent. On the contrary, Kyogre is based on a slow setup, but once it's down, it's very hard to contrast if you don't have the ability to one-shot the Kyogre, and most decks don't. They also have some matchups that they're going to suffer against. Keldeo's not great against Seismitoad, and Kyogre's not great against Rayquaza and Klinklang. But other than that, the field seems to be favourable. Keldeo, because it takes a bit of a setup, it can be bad against Seismitoad, and Kyogre, if you can one-hit like Rayquaza or block the Kyogre like Klinklang can, you can do something about that. So thank you very much to all of those people and anyone else who gave me opinions. I hugely appreciate that. It's really nice to be able to kind of share other people's opinions rather than just going through my own for a change. I know it would have been better to have audio clips from everyone, but it doesn't, people who are rushing off and around to Worlds, there's a lot of people who are cool enough to send me a paragraph of what they think about Worlds, recording and sending an audio clip. Not everyone's going to have time for that. So thank you to all of them, and thank you all if you have carried on for the hour and a quarter I've been going here. Good luck to everyone at Worlds from the UK and everyone that listens to PTCG Radio. My general rule is, if you listen to this, I am cheering for you against whoever you're playing, unless you're also playing someone who listens to PTCG Radio. And if anybody does listen to this and play someone else who also listens to this, i.e. we've got a PTCG Radio face-off at Worlds, I would be super interested to hear about that. Next week, we are going to be back with a huge rundown of everything you need to know about Worlds to really finish off this format before we go into next year's format of XY onwards. Good luck, and more importantly, safe travels and have fun. If you get there safely and you have fun, that is more important than doing well. Although if you're listening to this, I really hope you do well. Make sure that you subscribe on iTunes. Make sure you check out Wassy Plays on YouTube. And if you haven't subscribed to PTCG Radio on YouTube, what are you playing at? You'll love it. And I know that because if you've been listening to this for an hour and a quarter, I assure you, there's a whole bunch of good Pokemon stuff on that YouTube channel. I'll be back next week. Thank you very much for listening. Look after yourselves till next time. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.